The stars looked different from the bridge of the stellar wind. Jake Martinez pressed his face against the clear window and watched the distant lights move slowly past the ship. He had been in space for 3 months now, but still felt amazed every time he looked outside. Back on Earth, people could only dream of traveling between the stars, but here he was, flying through the galaxy with alien friends. Jake was 22 years old and the only human on the ship. The Galactic Naval Academy had invited him to join their special training program. Most people said it was just for show, to make humans feel welcome in the galaxy. Jake knew they were probably right, but he did not care. He was living his dream of exploring space. The other cadets were much more impressive than Jake. Zeph came from Centauri and had skin that looked like blue crystal. His people were famous for being great at math and science. Zeph could solve problems in his head that would take Jake hours to figure out with a computer. When Zeph talked about stellar navigation, it sounded like poetry mixed with mathematics. Kira belonged to a race from Vega. Her people had natural abilities that let them feel magnetic fields and energy currents in space. She could sense things that no machine could detect. When Kira closed her eyes and concentrated, she could tell them exactly where they were just by feeling the invisible forces around them. Her silver hair moved like it was underwater, responding to magnetic fields that Jake could not even imagine. Oren was a Rigelian, and he was huge compared to the others. His people grew up in heavy gravity, so Oren was incredibly strong. But more than that, Rigelians understood gravity in ways that other races found mysterious. Oren could feel the pull of distant stars and planets. He navigated through space the way Jake might walk through a familiar neighborhood, knowing instinctively which way to go. Commander Vex led their training mission. He came from the Tau Ceti system and had been flying between stars for over 200 years. His gray skin was marked with the ritual scars that showed his rank and experience. Commander Vex had seen everything the galaxy could throw at a spaceship, or so Jake thought. Their mission was supposed to be simple. The Academy wanted them to fly through something called the Void Sector. This was a part of space where stars were far apart and strange energy fields made navigation difficult. It was like a test for young pilots. If you could navigate through the Void Sector, you could handle almost anything. Jake's job was communications. He monitored radio signals and kept in touch with the Academy. It was not very exciting work, but Jake was happy to be useful. The other cadets had amazing natural abilities, while Jake was just a regular human with regular human senses. He could not calculate star positions like Zeph, or feel magnetic fields like Kira, or sense gravity like Oren. The stellar wind was a beautiful ship built with the best technology in the galaxy. Its navigation computers could plot courses through any known region of space. The quantum positioning system could tell them exactly where they were within a few meters. Everything was automated and perfect, or so they believed. For the first day of their mission, everything went exactly as planned. They flew past familiar stars and through well-mapped regions of space. Commander Vex explained different navigation techniques while the cadets practiced using the ship's advanced systems. Jake listened carefully and tried to learn, even though most of the concepts were far beyond his understanding. On the second day, they reached the edge of the Void Sector. Jake could see why it got its name. When he looked out the windows, he saw mostly empty space with only a few dim stars scattered in the distance. The usual bright clusters of stars that filled most of the galaxy were missing here. It looked lonely and dangerous. Commander Vex gathered them on the bridge for a briefing. He explained that they would need to rely on their instruments more than their eyes in this region. The sparse stars made visual navigation nearly impossible, and strange energy fields could confuse their sensors. But he assured them that their advanced equipment could handle anything they might encounter. That confidence lasted exactly 6 hours. Jake was monitoring communications when alarms started ringing throughout the ship. Through the windows, he could see a massive red star that seemed to be having some kind of violent eruption. Huge flames of plasma shot out from its surface, and Jake could feel the ship shaking as waves of energy hit them. Commander Vex shouted orders, but his voice was barely audible over the noise of failing systems. Lights flickered on and off throughout the ship. Jake's communication equipment started smoking, and he quickly shut it down before it could catch fire. The electromagnetic storm from the dying star was incredibly powerful. It fried their navigation computers instantly. Jake watched helplessly as screen after screen went dark or filled with meaningless static. The quantum positioning system failed completely. Even their backup instruments were damaged beyond repair. When the storm finally passed, they found themselves in complete silence. The ship was still working, but all their navigation equipment was dead. Worse, Jake realized they had been pushed far off course by the powerful energy waves. When he looked out the windows, he saw stars he had never seen before. Nothing looked familiar. Commander Vex tried to stay calm, but Jake could see worry in his ancient eyes. Zeph immediately began trying to repair the navigation computers, his crystal fingers moving quickly over damaged circuits. Kira closed her eyes and tried to sense their location using her natural magnetic abilities. Oren pressed his hands against the ship's hull, feeling for familiar gravitational currents, but nothing worked. They were lost in a part of space that appeared on no maps, with no working instruments to guide them home. Their food and fuel supplies were limited, and nobody knew where they were or how to find them. Jake stared out at the strange stars and felt more helpless than ever. His crewmates had amazing abilities and years of training, but even they seemed unable to solve this problem. What could a simple human do in a situation like this? He was just the communications officer, and even his communications equipment was broken. The stellar wind drifted through unknown space while its crew tried desperately to find their way home. The next few days became a nightmare of failed attempts and growing desperation. Jake watched his crewmates work around the clock, trying every technique they had learned at the academy. The ship drifted through empty space while they struggled to repair systems that seemed beyond fixing. Zeph spent most of his time in the engineering section, surrounded by the broken pieces of their navigation computers. His crystal fingers moved with incredible precision as he tried to rebuild the damaged circuits. Jake could hear him muttering mathematical formulas in his native language, calculating and recalculating possible solutions. The Centauran had access to a vast database of stellar information stored in the ship's memory banks. Every known star in the galaxy had been catalogued with precise measurements of its position, brightness, and spectral signature. Under normal circumstances, Zeph could match any visible star to this database and determine their exact location within minutes. But when Zeph finally got one of the computers working again, the results made no sense. The stars visible from their current position did not match anything in the galactic database. Every star appeared to be completely unknown, as if they had somehow traveled to a different galaxy entirely. Zeph ran the analysis dozens of times, but the answer was always the same. They were in uncharted space. Jake brought Zeph food and water while he worked, trying to stay helpful without getting in the way. The Centaurian barely looked up from his calculations, muttering about impossible spectral readings and stellar positions that violated everything he had learned about galactic geography. Meanwhile, Kira tried to use her natural abilities to sense their location. She spent hours in the ship's meditation chamber, floating in zero gravity with her eyes closed and her silver hair spreading around her like a halo. Jake could see her concentrating intensely, reaching out with senses he could barely understand. Kira's people navigated by feeling the magnetic fields that flowed between stars like invisible rivers. These cosmic currents were created by the rotation of planets and the nuclear fires burning inside stars. An experienced vegan navigator could follow these currents across thousands of light years, never getting lost as long as they could sense the familiar patterns. But when Kira opened her eyes, her expression was troubled. The magnetic fields in this region were chaotic and unstable. Instead of the steady currents she expected, she found swirling eddies and conflicting forces that seemed to change direction every few hours. Several neutron stars in the area were creating powerful gravitational distortions that twisted the normal flow of cosmic energy. She tried to explain what she sensed to Commander Vex, but her descriptions sounded more like poetry than navigation. "Data, the magnetic currents felt angry and confused," she said. They pulled in different directions at once like a river trying to flow uphill. Nothing felt familiar or safe. Oren had his own approach to the problem. Rigelians understood space in terms of gravity wells and the curves of space-time created by massive objects. He could feel the pull of distant stars and planets in his bones. Sensing the invisible architecture that held the galaxy together, the big alien spent hours pressing his hands against different parts of the ship's hull, trying to feel the gravitational signatures of nearby stellar objects. His people had used this technique for thousands of years before they developed technology. Even with his eyes closed, an experienced Rigelian could navigate by gravity alone, but Oren's attempts were no more successful than the others. The gravitational fields in this region were a mess of competing forces. Multiple neutron stars created overlapping areas of intense gravity that masked the gentler pulls of normal stars. Every time Oren thought he had identified a familiar gravitational signature, it would shift or disappear entirely. He tried to explain the problem to Jake in simple terms. "Imagine trying to find your way home," he said, "but every landmark keeps moving around when you are not looking." The gravitational map of this region changed constantly, making it impossible to use as a navigation reference. Commander Vex watched these efforts with growing concern. His 2 centuries of experience had prepared him for equipment failures and navigation challenges, but nothing like this. The advanced academy training that had prepared them for standard deep space scenarios was proving useless in their current situation. The veteran commander called regular meetings to discuss their options, but each session ended in frustration. Their technology was designed for well-mapped regions of known space. In this cosmic wilderness, their sophisticated instruments were no better than ancient tools. Food became a constant worry. They had brought enough supplies for a 2-week training mission, but they had already been missing for over a week with no sign of rescue. Commander Vex imposed strict rationing, cutting their meals to half portions. The recycling systems that turned their waste into fresh water and air were showing signs of strain. Most troubling of all was their fuel situation. The stellar wind used a fusion drive that consumed hydrogen at a steady rate. They had enough fuel for several more weeks of normal flight, but without knowing which direction led home, they could easily waste their remaining energy flying deeper into unknown space. Jake felt increasingly useless as his crewmates exhausted their expertise. His communication equipment remained completely dead despite his attempts to repair it. The electromagnetic storm had fused the delicate circuits beyond any hope of restoration. Even if he could fix it, they were probably too far from civilization for anyone to hear their distress calls. The human spent most of his time maintaining basic ship systems and trying to stay out of the way. He cleaned the air filters, checked the water recycling systems, and monitored their dwindling supplies. It was simple work that required no special training or alien abilities. At night, when the others finally stopped working, Jake would sit alone in the observation deck and stare out at the unfamiliar stars. The view was beautiful but terrifying. Countless points of light glittered in the darkness, but none of them offered any hope of finding home. The crew's morale dropped with each passing day. Zeph became increasingly frustrated with his failed calculations. Kira grew quiet and withdrawn, overwhelmed by the chaotic magnetic fields that gave her constant headaches. Oren's usual cheerful confidence faded as his gravitational senses continued to provide confusing and contradictory information. Commander Vex tried to maintain discipline and hope, but Jake could see the fear growing in the old commander's eyes. They were running out of time, food, and fuel while drifting further into the unknown. Unless they found a solution soon, their training mission would become their tomb. Jake knew he should feel more afraid, but mostly he felt sorry for his crewmates. They were all exceptional individuals with amazing abilities, yet none of their talents could save them from this situation. It seemed unfair that such capable people should be defeated by a random accident in space. He wished he could help somehow. But what could an ordinary human do that these remarkable aliens could not? While his crewmates continued their desperate attempts to repair the sophisticated navigation systems, Jake found himself wandering through the ship's empty corridors. The constant sounds of failing equipment and frustrated voices had begun to wear on everyone's nerves. He needed somewhere quiet to think. The ship's recreational library was a small room filled with entertainment files from dozens of different worlds. Most cadets used it to watch movies or read stories from their home planets during long voyages. Jake had spent many evenings here, feeling homesick and missing Earth. Among the digital files, Jake kept a personal collection of documents from home. These were things he had brought to remind himself of Earth during his time at the academy. Most of it was simple stuff: photographs of his family, music from his favorite bands, and some historical documents he had studied in school. Jake had always been interested in history, especially the age when humans first began exploring Earth's oceans. He found it amazing that people with such simple tools had managed to cross vast distances and discover new lands. His collection included old navigation charts from sailing ships, star maps used by ancient explorers, and guides for finding direction, using only the sun and stars. To his alien crewmates, these documents represented the primitive attempts of a species that had barely learned to leave their home planet. Humans had only joined galactic civilization 50 years ago, and their technology was still considered laughably basic compared to what other races had developed over thousands of years. But as Jake looked through his historical files, something began to interest him. These ancient human navigators had faced a problem very similar to his current situation. They had sailed across Earth's oceans with no maps, no computers, and no way to call for help if they got lost. Yet somehow they had found their way to distant lands and safely returned home. Jake opened a file containing navigation techniques used by Polynesian sailors. These people had crossed the Pacific Ocean in small boats, traveling thousands of miles between tiny islands. They had no instruments except their eyes and their knowledge of the stars. Yet they rarely got lost and could find their way home even. After months at sea, the more Jake read, the more fascinated he became. These ancient navigators had used the positions of stars to determine their location. They watched how the stars moved across the sky during the night and how their positions changed throughout the year. By carefully observing these patterns, they could figure out exactly where they were and which direction would take them home. Jake started spending hours in the ship's observation deck, manually recording the positions of visible stars. He used simple paper and pencil to draw charts, measuring angles with basic trigonometry that any high school student could understand. It was slow work that required patience and careful attention to detail. The techniques he was using were thousands of years old. Long before humans had computers or even electricity, sailors had navigated Earth's oceans using nothing but the stars above them. They understood that stars moved in predictable patterns, and if you knew how to read those patterns, you could find your way anywhere. When Zeph discovered what Jake was doing, the Centauran was initially dismissive. The idea that primitive human techniques could succeed where advanced galactic technology had failed seemed completely absurd. Zeph had access to quantum computers that could perform billions of calculations per second, while Jake was using pencil and paper like a child, doing homework. But Jake patiently explained the mathematical principles behind celestial navigation. He showed Zeph how ancient human sailors had used the angle between certain stars and the horizon to determine their latitude. He demonstrated how the rotation of stars throughout the night could reveal their longitude. The techniques were elegant. In their simplicity, Zeph found himself intrigued despite his initial skepticism. The mathematics involved were basic but surprisingly sophisticated. These ancient humans had developed a complete system of navigation based on careful observation and logical thinking. They had solved complex three-dimensional problems using only simple geometry. Jake's approach was fundamentally different from anything taught at the academy. Instead of relying on computers and databases, he used pure observational astronomy combined with mathematical calculations that could be performed by hand. His methods were slower and required more manual work, but they did not depend on functioning equipment or access to galactic information networks. As Jake continued his observations, he began to notice patterns in the local star field that the damaged computers had missed. Some of the stars visible from their current position seemed familiar, though he could not immediately identify them. Others moved in ways that suggested they might be relatively close to known regions of space, using triangulation techniques. Borrowed from ancient Earth mapmakers, Jake started to piece together their approximate position. He treated the three-dimensional space around them like an ocean, using distant stars as fixed reference points just as Earth sailors had once used coastal landmarks. The process was incredibly tedious. Jake had to make careful measurements. Every few hours as the ship rotated and the stars appeared to move across the sky, he filled page after page with numbers and calculations, double-checking his work to avoid errors that could send them in the wrong direction. Commander Vex noticed Jake's activities but said nothing at first. The veteran commander was too busy dealing with more pressing problems to worry about what the human was doing with his spare time. Besides, if the advanced systems could not solve their navigation problem, what hope did primitive human techniques have? But as days passed and Jake's calculations became more detailed, Commander Vex began to pay attention. The human was working with a level of focus and determination that impressed the old commander. Jake spent every free moment bent over his charts, making measurements and performing calculations with careful precision. Kira also became curious about Jake's work. During one of her breaks from sensing magnetic fields, she found him in the observation deck drawing star patterns. She watched quietly as he used a simple protractor to measure angles between different stars, recording each measurement in neat columns of numbers. When Jake explained what he was doing, Kira was amazed by the simplicity of the concept. Her people had always relied on their natural magnetic senses, never thinking to use the stars themselves as navigation tools. The idea that you could determine your position just by watching how stars moved across the sky seemed almost magical. Oren joined them in the observation deck and listened as Jake described his progress. The big Rigelian was fascinated by the mathematical elegance of triangulation. His people understood three-dimensional space instinctively, but they had never thought to apply geometric principles in quite this way. Jake showed them how ancient human navigators had divided the sky into sections and given names to different star patterns. By memorizing these patterns and understanding how they changed throughout the night, a navigator could determine both position and direction without any instruments except their eyes. The more Jake worked, the more confident he became that his approach might actually succeed. His hand-drawn star charts were beginning to provide answers that the ship's advanced computers could not. He was starting to recognize some of the stellar configurations from his study of Earth's historical astronomy. Most importantly, Jake was beginning to develop a rough idea of where they might be located relative to known space. His calculations suggested they were not as impossibly far from home as everyone had feared. Jake's breakthrough came during his 5th day of careful star observations. He was sitting in the observation deck with his hand-drawn charts spread around him when he noticed something that made his heart race with excitement. Several of the stars visible from their current position matched entries in his collection of historical Earth star catalogs. These were not just any stars, but specific ones that had been visible from Earth and carefully studied by human astronomers long before humanity had joined galactic civilization. Jake recognized the distinctive pattern of a triple star system that had been catalogued by Earth's astronomers centuries ago. In his historical files, this system was listed with precise measurements of its brightness, color, and position relative to other nearby stars. The discovery was incredibly significant. If Jake could identify stars that appeared in Earth's historical records, he could use their known positions to calculate where his ship was currently located. It was like finding familiar landmarks in an unknown wilderness. Jake worked through the night, comparing his observations with the historical star catalogs in his files. The process required incredible patience and attention to detail. He had to account for the fact that stars move very slowly through space over time, changing their apparent positions when viewed from different locations using mathematical principles. Developed by ancient astronomers, Jake began working backward from known star positions. He calculated where certain stars should appear when viewed from different points in space, creating a three-dimensional map based on Earth's historical astronomical observations, the calculations were complex but not impossible. Jake used the same trigonometric methods that Earth's navigators had employed to map the oceans and chart unknown lands. He treated the stars as fixed reference points and used their apparent positions to triangulate his ship's location in three-dimensional space. The process took several more days of careful work. Jake had to make repeated observations to account for the ship's rotation and movement through space. He filled dozens of pages with calculations, checking and rechecking his work to ensure accuracy. Any error in his measurements could send them flying in the wrong direction. Commander Vex had been watching Jake's progress with growing interest. The veteran commander had initially been skeptical of the human's primitive methods, but he could not argue with the mathematical rigor of Jake's approach. The young human was applying solid principles of geometry and astronomy, even if his tools were incredibly basic. When Jake finally presented his preliminary findings, the crew gathered around his hand-drawn charts with amazement. According to his calculations, they were not as far from known space as they had feared. The electromagnetic storm that had damaged their ship had pushed them into a region that appeared on no galactic chart simply because it had never been explored. Not because it was impossibly distant from civilization. Jake's rough position fix suggested they were actually on the outer edge of a well-known stellar region. The reason their location seemed completely unfamiliar was that they were viewing familiar stars from an unusual angle. It was like being lost in your own neighborhood, but seeing it from a direction you had never traveled before. Zeph was the first to understand the implications of Jake's discovery. The Centaurian immediately began incorporating Jake's observational data into his own stellar mechanics calculations. Using Jake's position estimates, Zeph could finally make sense of the confusing star patterns that had baffled him for days. Working together, Jake and Zeph developed a more precise fix on their location. Jake's ancient human techniques provided the basic framework, while Zeph's advanced knowledge of stellar mechanics filled in the details. The combination of primitive observation and sophisticated calculation proved incredibly powerful. Kira contributed her magnetic sensitivity to verify their calculations. Using Jake's position data as a starting point, she could finally make sense of the chaotic magnetic fields that had been giving her headaches. The strange currents and conflicting forces began to form recognizable patterns when viewed from the correct perspective. Oren applied his understanding of gravitational mechanics to Jake's navigation framework. The confusing maze of gravitational distortions became clearer when he understood their actual position relative to the nearby neutron stars. What had seemed like random chaos was actually a predictable pattern of interacting gravity wells. Jake used triangulation methods borrowed from ancient land surveyors to identify several potential navigation routes that could lead them back to charted space. His approach treated the three-dimensional space around them like an ocean, using distant stars as fixed reference points just as Earth sailors had once used mountains and coastlines. The navigation routes Jake plotted avoided the worst of the gravitational distortions while taking advantage of clear lines of sight to reference stars. He planned their course like an ancient mariner plotting a path between dangerous reefs, using careful observation and mathematical calculation to find safe passage. Commander Vex studied Jake's proposed routes with the eye of an experienced navigator. The human's calculations appeared sound, and his navigation logic was surprisingly sophisticated. Jake had identified 3 possible courses home, each with different advantages and risks. The shortest route would take them directly through a region of intense gravitational distortion created by 2 nearby neutron stars. This path would save fuel and time but required precise navigation to avoid being torn apart by tidal forces. Jake had calculated the safest trajectory through this dangerous region using principles borrowed from Earth's maritime navigation. The longest route avoided all major gravitational hazards but would consume most of their remaining fuel. This path followed a series of relatively stable reference stars, allowing them to navigate safely but slowly back to known space. It was the most conservative option, similar to how ancient sailors had hugged coastlines rather than venturing into open ocean. The middle route offered a compromise between speed and safety. Jake had identified a path that used several intermediate waypoints, allowing them to check their progress and adjust course if necessary. This approach was similar to how Polynesian navigators had island hopped across the Pacific, using intermediate destinations to break long journeys into manageable segments. The crew spent hours discussing the merits of each route. Commander Vex was impressed by the thoroughness of Jake's analysis and the mathematical precision of his calculations. The human had not only solved their navigation problem but had provided multiple options with clear assessments of the risks and benefits of each. Most remarkably, Jake's entire navigation system did not depend on functioning computers or access to galactic databases. His methods were based on careful observation and hand calculation, making them perfect for emergency situations when advanced technology failed. Zeph began developing improved versions of Jake's techniques, combining human observational methods with Centaurian mathematical precision. Kira discovered that her magnetic sensitivity could enhance the accuracy of stellar triangulation by detecting subtle electromagnetic signatures from distant stars. Oren learned to apply his gravitational instincts to Jake's methodical approach, creating more intuitive navigation solutions. Working as a team, they refined Jake's navigation system into something that combined the best aspects of each species' natural abilities. The result was a hybrid approach that was both scientifically rigorous and practically useful in their current emergency. Commander Vex made the final decision about which route to follow. After careful consideration of their fuel supplies, food, reserves, and the condition of their damaged ship, he chose Jake's middle route. The island-hopping approach would allow them to verify their progress at regular intervals while maintaining reasonable safety margins. For the first time since their ordeal began, the crew of the Stellar Wind had confidence in their direction and purpose. Jake's ancient human navigation methods had provided them with hope and a clear path home. Using Jake's carefully calculated navigation route, the crew of the Stellar Wind began their journey home with renewed hope. The course Jake had plotted took them through several star systems that appeared on no galactic charts, but his mathematical predictions proved accurate as they encountered exactly the stellar configurations he had promised at each waypoint. The first checkpoint came after 2 days of travel. Jake had predicted they would find a distinctive red giant star paired with a smaller white companion at a specific location along their route. When the binary star system appeared exactly where his calculations said it would be, the entire crew felt a surge of confidence in their human navigator's abilities. Commander Vex watched with amazement as Jake verified their position using nothing more than a protractor, some basic trigonometry, and careful observation of the stars around them. The young human worked with the methodical precision of someone following a well-tested procedure, even though he was using techniques that predated spaceflight by thousands of years. The journey was not without its challenges. They had to carefully manage their remaining fuel reserves as they navigated around several gravitational anomalies that Jake had identified in his star charts. The human had learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated dangerous regions of space, much like ancient sailors had learned to read ocean currents and weather patterns. At one point, they encountered a field of cosmic debris that threatened to damage their already fragile ship. Jake consulted his charts and recommended a detour that would take them around the hazard. His route added several hours to their journey but kept them safely away from the dangerous floating rocks and metal fragments. As they traveled, Jake taught his crewmates the principles behind his navigation methods. The experience became an incredible learning opportunity for all of them. Zeph was fascinated by the mathematical elegance of celestial navigation and began developing improved versions that combined human techniques with Centaurian precision. The Centaurian discovered that Jake's observational methods could be enhanced using his people's natural ability to process complex calculations. By combining human patience and attention to detail with Centaurian mathematical sophistication, they created navigation techniques that were both accurate and efficient. Kira learned that her magnetic sensitivity could dramatically improve the accuracy of stellar triangulation. She found that she could detect subtle electromagnetic signatures from distant stars that were invisible to normal instruments. This additional data made Jake's position calculations even more precise and reliable. The vegan navigator was amazed by how well Jake's methods complemented her natural abilities. Where her magnetic senses provided intuitive understanding of their environment, Jake's mathematical approach gave them precise measurements and reliable calculations. Together, they could navigate with unprecedented accuracy. Oren discovered how to apply his gravitational instincts to Jake's methodical approach. The big Rigelian learned to feel the subtle gravitational signatures that Jake identified in his charts. This combination of analytical thinking and instinctive understanding created navigation solutions that were both scientifically sound and practically intuitive. Commander Vex observed these developments with growing respect for both Jake's ingenuity and the collaborative spirit that was emerging among his cadets. The crisis had transformed them from a collection of individuals, showcasing their species' particular talents, into a unified team that combined their diverse abilities in remarkable ways. The veteran commander found himself learning alongside his students. Jake's techniques filled gaps in his own extensive knowledge, providing backup methods that could work when advanced technology failed. Commander Vex began to understand that every species brought unique perspectives to the challenges of space navigation. Each day brought them closer to familiar territory. Jake's navigation waypoints appeared exactly where his calculations predicted, building confidence in their route and their navigator. The crew began to relax as their fuel consumption stayed within acceptable limits and their food supplies proved adequate for the journey. After 2 weeks of careful navigation, they finally encountered a galactic patrol vessel in a system that appeared on standard star charts. The rescue ship's crew was amazed to learn that the lost cadets had navigated home using ancient techniques developed by humanity's primitive ancestors. The patrol ship's captain, a grizzled veteran from the Rigel system, examined Jake's hand-drawn star charts with fascination. He had never seen navigation performed without computers and had difficulty believing that such primitive methods could be effective in the modern era of space travel, but the evidence was undeniable. The stellar wind had successfully traveled through uncharted space using nothing more than careful observation and mathematical calculation. Jake's ancient human techniques had succeeded where the most advanced galactic technology had failed. Word of their survival spread quickly through the Galactic Naval Academy. The story of how a human cadet had saved his alien crewmates using pre-space flight navigation methods became legendary throughout the institution. Jake's achievement fundamentally changed how other species viewed human contributions to galactic civilization. The incident demonstrated that humans brought unique perspectives and problem-solving approaches that could complement even the most advanced alien technology. While other species had developed sophisticated instruments and natural abilities, humans had created systematic methods for solving problems using only basic tools and careful thinking. The Academy immediately began incorporating Jake's techniques into their emergency navigation curriculum. Instructors recognized that primitive methods could provide crucial backup capabilities when advanced systems failed. Jake's approach offered redundancy and reliability that sophisticated technology sometimes lacked. Jake himself became something of a celebrity at the Academy. He was invited to teach courses on alternative navigation techniques, sharing the ancient wisdom of Earth's explorers with students from across the galaxy. His classes became extremely popular as cadets learned to appreciate the elegance and reliability of human navigation methods. The experience permanently bonded the crew of the Stellar Wind. Zeph, Kira, and Oren became Jake's closest friends and strongest advocates within the Academy. They helped establish humanity's reputation as resourceful and innovative partners in galactic civilization. Their successful mission proved that sometimes the oldest solutions are the most reliable. While advanced technology could fail or be damaged, the fundamental principles of observation and calculation that Jake had used were virtually indestructible. Knowledge and intelligence could overcome almost any technological disadvantage. Commander Vex wrote in his official report that the mission's success demonstrated the critical importance of diversity and problem-solving approaches. He emphasized the dangers of over-reliance on technology and recommended that all navigation students learn backup methods that did not depend on functioning computers. The ancient human techniques that had saved their lives served as a powerful reminder that wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places. The galaxy's newest members had proven they had much to teach. Even its oldest and most advanced civilizations, Jake's achievement became a source of pride for all humanity. His success showed that humans belonged in galactic civilization not as junior partners or ceremonial participants, but as full contributors with valuable skills and knowledge to share. The young human who had once felt useless compared to his alien crewmates had become a hero and a teacher. His story inspired countless other humans to pursue careers in space exploration, confident that their species had important contributions to make to the galactic community. Years later, Jake's navigation techniques would be credited with saving hundreds of lives when other ships found themselves lost in space with damaged equipment. His methods became standard emergency procedures throughout the galaxy, ensuring that future generations of space travelers would never be truly lost as long as they could see the stars.